Memphis, 1974. Elvis Presley's manager calls Dolly Parton with an offer that could make her millions overnight. He wants the king to record her song, I Will Always Love You. There's just one condition. Elvis gets half the publishing rights. Forever. Dolly listens to the offer, takes a deep breath, and does something nobody expected. She says no to Elvis Presley. You've got to understand what that meant in 1974. This wasn't just any musician calling. Elvis wasn't just famous. He was American royalty, the biggest star on the planet. When the king wanted your song, you didn't think twice. You said yes, you cashed the check, and you told everyone you knew that Elvis Presley recorded your music. But Dolly Parton looked at that deal and saw something else entirely. She saw a trap disguised as a gift. To understand why, we need to go back to where this song came from. It wasn't written for Elvis. It wasn't even written for the radio. I Will Always Love You was Dolly's goodbye letter to Porter Wagoner, the man who'd given her career its biggest break and then made leaving him the hardest thing she'd ever done. Porter Wagoner was country music's biggest television star. His syndicated show reached millions of viewers every week. When he invited Dolly to join as his female vocalist in 1967, she was nobody. A girl from the Tennessee mountains with big dreams and bigger hair. Porter made her a star, but he also made her his possession. For 7 years, Dolly stood beside Porter on that stage, watching him take credit for her success while she wrote songs he'd never understand. She'd pen these deeply personal lyrics in the back of his tour bus, then watch him dismiss them as too soft or not commercial enough. But the crowds loved her. They loved her voice, her songwriting, her warmth. And Porter knew it. He could see them watching her instead of him, and it ate at him. The arrangement worked for everyone except Dolly. She was getting famous, making decent money, learning the business. But she was also becoming a prisoner of someone else's vision. Porter decided what songs she could sing, what clothes she could wear, even who she could talk to after shows. He treated her like a talented pet instead of a creative partner. When Dolly finally decided to leave the Porter Wagoner show in 1974, Porter fought her like she was property being stolen. He threatened lawsuits. He badmouthed her to radio stations. He told anyone who'd listen that Dolly Parton was nothing without him. The man who discovered her was now trying to destroy her. Here's the thing about Dolly. When people pushed her, she didn't push back. She wrote songs. Beautiful, haunting songs that said everything she couldn't say out loud. I Will Always Love You wasn't just a song. It was her truth. Her way of telling Porter that she was grateful, but she had to go. Her way of saying goodbye without burning bridges she couldn't afford to burn. The song was pure Dolly. Simple melody, complex emotions. She recorded it in one take at RCA Studios in Nashville. No fancy production. No backup singers. Just Dolly and her guitar, singing from a place so honest it made grown men cry. The song hit #1 on the country charts twice. First in 1974, then again when she re-recorded it in 1982. What she didn't know then was that this little goodbye song would soon put her in the most impossible position of her career. But here's what happened next. Elvis heard the song and fell in love with it. Not just liked it, fell in love with it. He told his musicians he wanted to record it for his next album. This wasn't unusual. Elvis had built his career covering other people's songs. Hound Dog, That's All Right, Can't Help Myself. Elvis took other people's music and made it immortal. When Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, called Dolly's team, it felt like destiny calling. Parker had this smooth, carnival barker voice that made everything sound like the opportunity of a lifetime. He told Dolly's people that Elvis was going to make I Will Always Love You the centerpiece of his next album. He was going to sing it on his television specials, maybe even in his Las Vegas shows. Parker painted a picture of what this could mean. Elvis performing Dolly's song in front of thousands of screaming fans at the International Hotel in Las Vegas. The song being featured on his next NBC special, watched by millions of families across America. This wasn't just about recording a single. This was about making Dolly Parton a household name overnight. But then Parker dropped the bombshell. Elvis never recorded a song unless he got half the publishing rights. It wasn't personal. It was business. Standard operating procedure. Every songwriter who wanted the king to touch their music had to give up 50% of their publishing forever. In return, they got the kind of exposure money couldn't buy. This was how the Elvis machine worked. Parker had built an empire by taking pieces of other people's creativity and turning them into gold records. It was a system that had made Elvis the biggest star in the world, and it had made Parker one of the most powerful men in entertainment. Nobody questioned it because nobody wanted to be left out of the magic. Picture yourself in Dolly's shoes for a second. You're 28 years old, still fighting for respect in Nashville. You've got talent, but you don't have Elvis-level fame. This one decision could set you up for life. Elvis Presley singing your song would put your name in every household in America. The money would be incredible. The prestige would be even better. Dolly's business manager at the time was a tough, no-nonsense woman who understood the music industry better than most men. She laid out the numbers for Dolly. If Elvis recorded the song and it became a hit, Dolly would make hundreds of thousands of dollars. If it became a standard, the kind of song that gets played forever, she'd make millions, even with giving up half the rights. The math seemed simple. Take the deal with Elvis, make instant money, get worldwide exposure. It was the kind of offer most songwriters only dreamed of getting. But there was another calculation Dolly's manager wanted her to consider. What if this song had legs? What if it could work beyond country music, beyond even Elvis? But here's where things got complicated. Publishing rights weren't just about money. They were about ownership, about who gets to say how your song is used, where it's played, what movies can use it. When you sign away your publishing, you're signing away control of your art forever. You're betting that the immediate payoff is worth more than everything that song might become in the future. Dolly understood this better than most songwriters. She'd watched too many artists get rich quick by selling their publishing, only to watch other people make fortunes off their creativity for decades. She'd seen what happened when you let someone else own your words, your melodies, your heart. The night before she had to give Parker her answer, Dolly couldn't sleep. She walked around her little house in Nashville, thinking about everything Porter Wagoner had taught her about the business. Not the creative stuff, the business stuff. How to read contracts, how to protect yourself, how to recognize when someone's trying to take more than they deserve. Porter had been controlling, possessive, sometimes cruel. But he'd also taught her to never sign anything without understanding exactly what she was giving up. And right now, Parker was asking her to give up something she wasn't sure she could live without. This choice would follow her for the rest of her life. She just didn't know if it would be as a blessing or a curse. This is where it gets interesting. Dolly didn't just say no to Elvis. She said no to the entire system that made deals like this standard. She looked at Colonel Parker's offer and decided that her art was worth more than Elvis Presley's fame. When she called Parker back the next morning, her voice was steady, polite, final. She thanked him for thinking of her. She said she was honored that Elvis liked the song, but she couldn't give up half the publishing. If Elvis wanted to record it with her keeping full control, she'd be thrilled. Otherwise, she'd have to pass. Parker was shocked. Nobody said no to Elvis, especially not country singers who needed all the help they could get. He tried to negotiate, maybe 40%, 35%. But Dolly held firm. She wasn't trying to be difficult. She was trying to be smart. The call ended politely. Parker said he understood. Dolly said she hoped there'd be other opportunities. Both of them knew there probably wouldn't be. When you say no to Elvis Presley, you don't usually get a second chance. Parker had been in this business long enough to know that artists who didn't play by his rules didn't get invited back to the table. For Dolly, hanging up that phone felt like closing a door she'd never be able to open again. She'd just said no to the biggest opportunity of her career, and there was no taking it back. No calling Parker the next day to say she'd changed her mind. Once you've drawn that line, you have to live with the consequences, whatever they might be. Here's what happened next. Elvis never recorded the song. He moved on to other material, other projects. Dolly went back to building her career one song at a time, one album at a time. For a while, it seemed like she'd made a terrible mistake. At the time, it felt like the wrong decision. Almost everyone thought it was. Other artists in Nashville heard about her decision and thought she'd lost her mind. You don't turn down Elvis Presley. You don't choose principle over profit. You take the deal, make the money, and figure out the rest later. Some of her friends stopped talking to her. Others started questioning whether Dolly really understood the business side of music. The whispers followed her everywhere. At industry parties, in recording studios, during radio interviews. People would look at her differently, like she'd committed some kind of professional suicide. Here was this country girl who'd somehow gotten too big for her britches, turning down the king of rock and roll. Who did she think she was? For months after the decision, Dolly second-guessed herself almost daily. She'd wake up wondering if she'd just thrown away her shot at real stardom. She'd hear Elvis songs on the radio and imagine how "I Will Always Love You" would have sounded in his voice. The doubt was eating her alive. But Dolly had learned something from her years with Porter Wagoner. When you give someone else control over your art, you're not just sharing the profits. You're sharing the power. And power, once given away, is almost impossible to get back. Porter had taught her that lesson the hard way, and she wasn't about to repeat it with Elvis, no matter how much it hurt to say no. The vindication for her choice would come from a direction nobody saw coming. Not another country star. Not even another white artist. The irony of her decision wouldn't become clear for another 18 years. In 1992, Whitney Houston was working on the Bodyguard soundtrack. She needed a love song that could carry emotional weight, something that felt both timeless and immediate. Her producers played her dozens of options. What saved this song wasn't another country singer. It was a voice no one expected to carry it. When they played "I Will Always Love You," Whitney knew she'd found it. Not the upbeat, pop version everyone expected her to record. The raw, emotional version that would showcase her incredible voice. She took Dolly's simple country ballad and turned it into a soul-stirring anthem that crossed every musical boundary imaginable. Whitney's version didn't just become a hit. It became a phenomenon. The song spent 14 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It became the best-selling single by a female artist in music history. The Bodyguard soundtrack sold over 45 million copies worldwide. Radio stations couldn't stop playing it. People couldn't stop buying it. It was everywhere, all the time for months. But here's what made this moment even more incredible. Whitney Houston was doing something country music had never really achieved. She was taking a song written by a white woman from Tennessee and making it speak to black audiences, white audiences, pop audiences, R&B audiences. She was proving that great songwriting could transcend every barrier the music industry had ever created. And here's the crazy part. Because Dolly had kept her publishing rights, she made more money from Whitney Houston's version than she would have made from Elvis Presley's version, even if Elvis had given her half the rights. The decision that seemed like career suicide in 1974 turned into the smartest business move of her life. But this story isn't really about money. It's about something deeper. When Dolly said no to Elvis, she was saying no to a system that expected female songwriters to be grateful for any attention they could get. She was saying that her art had value beyond what famous men decided it was worth. Years later, Dolly would say that turning down Elvis was one of the hardest decisions she ever made. Not because of the money, but because she genuinely loved Elvis as an artist. She grew up listening to his music. She understood his gift, his impact on American culture. Saying no felt like betraying something sacred. But she also understood that protecting her art wasn't about disrespecting Elvis. It was about respecting herself. About believing that her songs deserved to be treated as more than just raw material for other people's success. The publishing rights Dolly protected so fiercely in 1974 would become the foundation of her business empire. Today, she owns the rights to over 3,000 songs. Her catalog generates millions of dollars every year, not just from her own recordings, but from covers, samples, movies, commercials, and countless other uses. That decision created a ripple effect that changed everything. When other female songwriters saw what Dolly had done, how she'd stood up to the biggest name in music and won, it gave them permission to do the same. It showed them that their art had value beyond what the men in suits decided it was worth. Dolly's publishing company became one of Nashville's most powerful. She started signing other writers, helping them protect their work the same way she'd protected hers. She became a mentor to young artists who were facing the same impossible choices she'd once faced. The woman who'd said no to Elvis became the woman who taught others when to say no, too. That little song she wrote to say goodbye to Porter Wagoner has now been recorded by hundreds of artists. Linda Ronstadt took it to #2 on the pop charts. LeAnn Rimes made it a country hit all over again. Every version generates royalties that go directly to Dolly because she refused to give up what was hers. The song has earned her more money than any other single piece of music she's ever written. But the impact goes beyond money. "I Will Always Love You" proved that country music could speak to the world, that a woman's voice from the mountains of Tennessee could touch hearts in every corner of the globe. It showed that authentic emotion, when protected and nurtured properly, could outlast any trend, any fashion, any industry calculation. When reporters ask Dolly about the Elvis decision today, she smiles that knowing smile and says she has no regrets. She'll tell you that Elvis was a genius, a true original, a gift to American music. But she'll also tell you that sometimes the best deals are the ones you don't make. Here's what most people don't understand about that moment in 1974. It wasn't just about one song or one deal. It was about Dolly deciding what kind of artist she wanted to be. She could be the kind who said yes to every opportunity, grateful for whatever scraps the industry offered. Or she could be the kind who understood her worth and wasn't afraid to fight for it. The choice she made that day reflected everything she'd learned from growing up poor in the Smoky Mountains. Her family didn't have much, but they had pride. They had integrity. They understood that some things were worth more than money. When you came from nothing, you learned to protect what little you had with everything you possessed. The woman who said no to Elvis Presley was the same woman who would later build Dollywood, create the Imagination Library, and become one of the most successful entertainers in American history. The confidence she showed in protecting her art became the foundation for protecting her legacy. Every major decision she made after that phone call traced back to the same principle: never give away what you can't afford to lose. Today, business schools teach case studies about Dolly's decision. They use it as an example of long-term thinking, of understanding the true value of intellectual property. But those academic discussions miss the emotional reality of what she went through. The sleepless nights, the doubt, the fear that she'd just destroyed her career for the sake of pride. Today, I Will Always Love You stands as one of the most recorded songs in popular music history. It's been covered in virtually every genre, translated into dozens of languages, and performed everywhere from wedding chapels to concert halls. All because a 28-year-old woman from Tennessee decided her art was worth protecting. That phone call with Colonel Parker lasted maybe 10 minutes. But the decision Dolly made in those 10 minutes defined the next 50 years of her career. She chose artistic integrity over immediate gratification. She chose long-term vision over short-term gain. She chose to bet on herself when everyone else was telling her to bet on Elvis. The story of that phone call became legend in Nashville. Young songwriters would hear about the woman who'd said no to the king, and it would give them courage to stand up for their own work. Record executives learned they couldn't just demand publishing rights from every artist who walked through their doors. The industry itself began to change, slowly, because one woman had drawn a line in the sand. Dolly never publicly criticized Elvis or Colonel Parker for their business practices. She understood they were operating within a system that had worked for them for decades. But she also understood that systems only change when someone has the courage to say no, even when saying no feels impossible. The king never got to sing Dolly's goodbye song. But in refusing to let him have it, Dolly ensured that her voice would be heard long after both of their voices were gone. That's not just good business. That's the sound of an artist who knew exactly what she was worth.